Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Monday afternoon. And the NFL season is over. Thank the Lord. I'd never have to torture myself watching another Giants game ever again until next year, where we will hopefully have a much better situation and a much better quarterback at the helm. But speaking of, the NFL, we might as well talk about the final week, where each team stands in the postseason, what they're looking at, whether it be draft prospects or any sort of possibilities like that, since it is the conclusion of the regular season. And I'll go ahead and talk about that, a little bit more about that in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we are going to talk about Tyreek Hill. He wants out of Miami, and this is, I wouldn't say it's that big of a surprise, but it is a little bit surprising how quickly this news came about, because Tyreek said that on a post-game interview. I did not really expect him to do that, but we're going to talk about that, obviously, in the second segment. And then in the third segment, Tyreek Hill is not the only one who wants out of Miami. Jimmy Butler for the Miami Heat, he also wants to leave the team, and we're going to talk about that in the third segment. And then in the fourth segment, we are going to talk about the NFL wildcard matchups, since, the postseason is going to be around the corner, and the wild card is going to be what everyone is going to be interested in seeing. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, or just something that you're dying to share. We're all ears. If you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $sign below the chat box. If it's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or helps the show and makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So with that out of the way, let's go right ahead and get into this final NFL recap. Obviously, it's week 18, and all of the records, they've been decided. All of the draft placement has also been decided. And the teams that are in the playoffs have also been decided. And for the most part, it's very, the outcome of this is rather expected, aside from maybe the Commanders. I really did not expect the Commanders to end up making the playoffs at all this season. But, hey, they surprised me. And anything, at least in my opinion, anything is better than letting these Dallas Cowboys make the playoffs. Honestly, I am so happy that this is every single Cowboys fan right now. They have a 7-10 record. They deserve sadness. They deserve nothing but, and to make things even worse for them, Jerry, he wants to stay. He is going to continue being the owner of the terrible organization that is the Dallas Cowboys. He's going to continue being the emperor in his little emperor room. It really looks like the emperor's room if you look at Jerry's office whenever the Cowboys are drafting. You'll see, God damn it, this happens all the time. I'm sorry for that, but that's embarrassing. We're gonna edit that out. But anyways, my light is screwed up right now. It's very bad. And we're going to have to deal with it right now. So I'm going to try not to move. I'm going to try. If it does fall again, then I might just have to scratch the light entirely. But we'll see how this works. Anyways, that's payback for me talking about Jerry, apparently. But the results of a lot of these wins, obviously, the most surprising one to me is the Bears beating the Packers, because that usually never, ever happens. I mean, we never, ever see the Bears beat the Packers. And when they do, the last time we saw that was, almost 8 or so years ago. I mean, it was a very long time that the Bears continued to lose to the Packers. I mean, it was a running joke that the Packers, they completely own the Bears, and it doesn't matter who plays against, which quarterback is under center for the Packers, they always end up beating the Bears. But in this matchup, I mean, they benefited mainly because the Packers had to bench Jordan Love, and play Malik Willis. Now, that's not because they wanted to bench him, but it's because Jordan Love ended up leaving the game due to an injury. And they also had to assess Christian Watson for an injury as well, which is not good for the Packers considering how now they're going to go into the postseason most likely without their starting quarterback. So, not a very ideal situation for Green Bay right now, especially after losing to the team that you just destroy every single year. Caleb Williams didn't really play all that well in this game. He threw 1 touchdown and threw for 148 yards. Again, that's not really that impressive of a game. He also had an interception negated because of I forgot exactly what penalty it was, but there was a penalty thrown on the play, and that ultimately negated Caleb Williams' pick. But this is not a very ideal situation for the Packers. Now, the Colts, they ended up beating the Jaguars, a rather meaningless game. It would have meant a lot to them if they would have actually beaten the Giants in that week before. The Panthers, they ended up beating the Falcons. I will say this. Bryce Young has resurged like a madman. It is crazy just how much better he's playing now than what he was in the beginning of the season. I mean, 3 touchdowns, 251 yards, and was able to beat the Falcons. Now, the Falcons, they wouldn't have made the playoffs anyways because the Buccaneers, they ended up beating the Saints 27-19 to have a record of 10-7 and still host a wild card game. Also, Mike Evans ended up recording 11 straight consecutive seasons where he was able to get 1,000 receiving yards. Despite the injury, despite missing several games, he was still able to record 1,000 receiving yards, which is nothing short of impressive. Probably one of the most underrated wide receivers in the history of the NFL. And he did not record a touchdown in this game, but 89 yards, and that accolade is more than enough to cement himself. In my opinion, he should be, at the very least, a top 5 wide receiver when he retires, but most likely that's not going to happen, which is why I think he is the most underrated receiver in the entire history of the NFL. I mean, this is an accolade that only Jerry Rice has been able to accumulate. That is incredible. The consistency, the efficiency, it's amazing. Obviously, the Giants, they ended up losing to the Eagles because what else is new? The Commanders, they beat the Cowboys because that's exactly what Jerry gets. That's what the Cowboys get for being bad. And they were both of those teams and their standings in the playoffs and in the draft, they were already decided. The Commanders, they were going to make the playoffs as an away wild card, and the Cowboys, they weren't going to make the playoffs anyway. Now, speaking on the draft order, this is also very big. The Giants, they hold the 3rd draft pick, which means they could either draft Shedeur, Cam Ward, or Travis Hunter. And I have no problem with any of those 3 picks. Genuinely have no problem with either of those picks, really. The teams that are above them in the draft order are now the Titans and the Browns. That was the team, yeah. The Titans and the Browns. The Patriots, they held the number 1 pick in the draft. They controlled their destiny going into this game, and they surprisingly end up beating the Bills. Now, obviously, I'm very surprised at this. The Bills, they did not play Josh Allen, so it makes sense. But again, the Patriots did not play Drake May, and they also started Joe Milton out of nowhere. And Joe Milton surprisingly balled out in this game. But still, this is like a very surprising outcome to this game. One that I'm very happy because, I'm very happy that this ended up happening because in the end of the day, the Giants, they really needed a top 3 pick, and here they are. Now, the Patriots, they ended up firing their head coach almost directly after this game. No, it wasn't because they ended up winning. And also, the Giants are going to stick with their general manager as well as their head coach going into next season. Little mixed feelings on that, but I will talk about that in a future segment. Not today, but probably tomorrow. Let's see, what other outcomes? What other games? The Seahawks, they beat the Rams. That game was incredibly meaningless because the Rams have already cemented their spot in the division as the best team, and they hold the tiebreaker, so nothing is going to change. And the Jets, they beat the Dolphins 32-20. With this result, Tyreek Hill decided to request a trade. He did this like around 20 minutes ago. He requested a trade. I will say, though, that this is probably like the worst year of Tyreek Hill's entire career. I'm not entirely sure how many teams are willing to pay all of that money just to have Tyreek Hill on the roster based off of this performance from last year. But he's Tyreek Hill, so I wouldn't be surprised if anyone is going to... I wouldn't be surprised. Again, it might not happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does happen. Also, this might be Aaron Rodgers' last year as a quarterback for a team. The Chiefs, they did not score a single point against the Broncos. They did not want to face Joe Burrow in the postseason, which makes sense. They lost 38-0. It was embarrassing, but again, they were playing their third string, so not that embarrassing. Chargers, they beat the Raiders 34-20. And finally, in probably the most important regular season game in NFL history, the Vikings lost to the Lions 31-9, moving them to 14-3 and forcing them to play the Rams in the wild card. And the Lions, they end up getting the first round bye, and they're going to play whichever team ends up advancing in the wild card. Obviously, we're going to have to see which team that is. It's a little too early to tell. But the wild card teams right now, the Chargers, they're going up against the Texans. The Steelers, they're going up against the Ravens. The Broncos, they're going up against the Bills. The Packers are going up against the Eagles. Commanders are going up against the Bucks. And the Vikings are going up against the Rams. And I'll talk about the matchups and who I think is the favorite to win in each of these matchups in a later segment. But now we're going to go ahead and go into the second segment where I talk about Tyreek Hill and him wanting out of Miami. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be talking about Tyreek Hill wanting out of Miami and any of the possible teams that might be interested in him. Before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, something you're dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. If Super Chat's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, GSMCpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and donations that way as well. Either or really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the second segment. So again, this news sort of broke directly after the Dolphins ended up losing to the Jets. Now, Tyreek Hill, he said this in a post-game conference. He said that he wanted he wanted to go out. Like, he's a competitor, and being in Miami was not the best thing for his career. That's what he said. And I will say, it is a little bit odd seeing this come, like, it's too much of a coincidence that he's having the absolute worst year of his career, and now he wants out. Now, I'm not going to say he's that much of a diva, but it is a little bit self-centered. I mean, imagine it. This guy was voted as the best player in the entire NFL amongst his peers. And I don't even think he's going to be a top 50 NFL player. And he definitely wasn't playing like a top 50 NFL player. Like, Malik Neighbors is better than him this season. And that's not just, I'm not saying that just for, like, you know, because I'm a fan of the Giants and Malik Neighbors is probably the best player on the Giants. But I'm saying this because the numbers prove it already. Like, this is a really bad year for Tyreek Hill. A really bad year. And I personally, I knew that the reason why Tyreek wanted to play on Miami was literally for the, it was all for the money. There was absolutely no reason why he wanted to play for Miami, aside from the fact that he wanted the money. I mean, his stats this season, 959 yards. He wasn't able to crack 1,000 receiving yards. He averaged 56 yards per game compared to last season where he averaged 112 yards per game. He only had 6 touchdown catches compared to last season where he had 13. And just overall, he has been terrible this year, like absolutely terrible. He's had 123 targets, only receiving 81 of those targets. But again, this is one of the fewest amount of targets that he's had since 2019 on Kansas City. And even then, he was still a Pro Bowler. But this season has been terrible for Tyreek. It's been bad. And he wants out. I think, personally, part of the reason why he wants out is because he knows he's not going to win any major playoff games with Tua Tagovailoa. Now, I will say that Tua was not really playing all of that much in the regular season. He did have some concussions, so it's a little bit unfair to say that. But again, that is also part of it, because as a receiver, if you're going to be playing with a quarterback that is injured for most of the time and you don't have competent quarterbacks, you're not going to be all that happy. Now, we have Malik Neighbors, who played with 4 different starting quarterbacks. All of them are not great, and in fact, all of them are barely good. And he was still able to get his targets. He was still able to accumulate numbers and things like that, which is understandable. I get that. But this is Tyreek Hill we're talking about. Like, the fact that this guy was unable to do that, it seems very odd. It seems weird. Like, it's uncharacteristic for me to talk about Tyreek Hill as if he was, like, regressing, which I don't think he is. I genuinely don't think he's regressing. I just think this was an off year where he had to deal with several different quarterbacks. Because remember, he usually, for the most part of his career, he's only had to deal with one quarterback. For the most part, like, they stay relatively healthy. And being able to adapt is not really something that I think Tyreek Hill is used to, at least in the quarterback situation. Now, I think he's also realized that playing with Tua Tagovailoa is not going to be enough for his career. And obviously, this move to Miami, since the beginning, was money motivated. There was but one thing that really, like, aggravated me was that Tyreek Hill was trying to hype up Tua to be, like, on par with Patrick Mahomes. He was saying that Tua Tagovailoa was more accurate than Patrick. And everyone knew that was just a flat-out lie. Everybody, even probably players on the Dolphins, knew that was a flat-out lie, because Tua would underthrow Tyreek Hill so much. He's probably going to go back to Kansas City. I wouldn't be surprised, but again, with the contract that he has, I don't think Kansas City is willing to pay for all that much. But it's not looking good for Tyreek. And the teams that are most likely going to be interested in him they're probably going to second guess themselves, knowing that they're going to have to pay him all of that money. And considering how he's literally coming off the worst season of his entire career, teams are now most likely going to be less likely to want to pay Tyreek Hill all of that money. I mean, I personally would not want to pay Tyreek Hill all the money that he's making right now. Like the Niners, they're going to have to pay Brock Purdy, so I don't think they're a team that's going to want to that's going to be interested in him. The Cowboys, they're paying Dak Prescott all that money. I don't think that the Cowboys will want to get him. And even if his contract was a little bit cheaper, Jerry wouldn't want him either. Any other teams that could be in the running for him are most likely going to be wanting to shop for a solid quarterback more so than they're going to want to shop for a wide receiver now, considering how Tyreek Hill played. Could the Jets get him? I don't know. Maybe they could, but I don't see that happening at all. I genuinely don't. And really the biggest problem is whether or not Tyreek Hill is going to be able to produce like he was able to a year ago and be the best player that his peers thought that he was a year ago. That's really the big problem with this, with Tyreek Hill wanting to get traded. And he's already requested a trade, and he already put on his, I think it was his Twitter logo. Remember when Antonio Brown, he took off his Tampa Bay gear and started walking out of the Jets arena? I remember that. He posted a picture of that with his face cropped onto Antonio Brown's face. So clearly, I mean, I will say this. I like the fact that he wants to leave Miami. I like it because he is right. Limiting himself with a quarterback like Tua Tagovailoa is not something that he deserves. And a lot of people, they really, really question why he left the Chiefs and why he left a perfectly fine contending team, and everyone knew it was for the money. But at the end of the day, we can't really understand why he would leave for all of that money, because the way that we see it, these NFL players are making all that money regardless, and they're making way more money than any of us are. And it's like, it's the perspective that should matter. And Tyreek wanted all that money. And granted, he has a lot of kids, so I think it makes total sense why he moved to Miami so he could get the money. Because, geez, I don't even want to get into that. But having all of those kids, you need to make the big bucks if you want to provide for all of them. But that's all that I have in this second segment. And now we're going to continue on into the third segment where I talk about Jimmy Butler and his situation with Miami and what's going on over there. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the God, Jesus. I don't know why this keeps happening, but this is annoying. All right. And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm sorry. I apologize for that inconvenience, but my light keeps falling, and I can't stand that it keeps falling. I don't know why this is happening. This usually never happens, but we're going to have to deal with it until I fix it. And yeah, it's embarrassing, but regardless, we're going to have to deal with it. But technical difficulties, man. Get it together. But anyways, in this third segment, we're going to talk about Jimmy Butler and the little situation going on with the Miami Heat. And yeah, I saw this coming. Eventually, this was going to happen. It was just a matter of time for me. And, like, I knew it. I'm sure most of the Miami fans knew this. It was really just a matter of time for when Jimmy Butler was going to request a trade. And I'll explain why I knew this. I got notes for this. So, and I also said this before in a past segment when I was talking about the Miami Heat and their situation with their team. So now I'm just pulling up my notes real quick. Give me 1 second. All right. So the Miami Heat, 5 years ago, their best players were Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler Hero. 5 years later, their best players are Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler Hero. This team, this Miami Heat team, has been unable to make moves to bring in free agents and bring in a competent team that allows the Miami Heat to compete. They have been unable to do that. And you guys, I know some of you guys might say, oh, well, I mean, the Heat, they've been able to make the finals several years, and it's not really Jimmy Butler's fault that that the team is not good enough to win in the finals. It is partly his fault because he did underperform against the Denver Nuggets. One thing that is the biggest myth is playoff Jimmy Butler. He is not real. Every single time Jimmy Butler plays in the playoffs, he plays fantastic in the first round and then lays an egg in every other round. He's done that before. The only time where he hasn't done that was against the Lakers. And that even then, that one was a surprise. But against the Denver Nuggets, it was all his fault for the reason why the Miami Heat were losing, because he played terribly. He played horrible ball, terrible basketball. But that's besides the point. The situation remains the same. The Miami Heat, they have been unable to acquire new pieces and make themselves better. Look at what the Celtics have been able to do. Despite the fact that the Celtics are constantly making it to the Eastern Conference Finals every single year, they always try to make moves and look to improve. They ended up getting Kristaps and Drew Holiday a year ago, and that ultimately proved successful because they ended up winning the finals with them and other teams. The Bucks, they moved on from Drew Holiday, and they were able to acquire Damian Lillard, despite the fact that Chris Middleton has been lacking as well. Other teams that have made moves. Now, again, like the Thunder, a few years ago, they had Russell Westbrook and Paul George. They went ahead and they got rid of them, and they rebuilt, and they've established a winning culture in OKC. All of these teams have made, in fact, not all of, in most of the teams in the NBA, they have made championship-changing moves, and they have made moves that actually better their franchise. The Miami Heat, they haven't done any of that in the last 5 years. And it's like they're just trying to rely on this Heat culture to bring them all the way to the finals and to win in the finals in the end. And personally, I would have gotten sick of that. I would have gotten sick of that if I was Jimmy. Now, granted, this is not the reason why Jimmy Butler is requesting a trade. which is the only problem, which is the problem that I have with Jimmy Butler. I like the fact that he's requesting a trade because he does not belong in Miami. He does not deserve to be there. The team is wasting his talents. However, the reason for him wanting to leave, is more selfish than that. He wants to leave because Miami isn't willing to offer him an extension. And to be honest, I wouldn't do that either. Look at how Paul George is playing with the extension that he has. I mean, the 76ers, they moved on from Tobias Harris, and they went ahead and acquired Paul George. And Paul George is playing worse than Tobias Harris this season. It's really bad for Paul George. It's bad for the 76ers in general, to be honest. But this situation is not making Jimmy's situation any better, because teams are going to be less likely to pay for them, to pay for Jimmy, as opposed to after looking at what's going on with Paul George now, right? And at the same time, however, I understand what Jimmy's mindset is going to. He's going to okay, well, Paul George is making all of this money, and I think I'm playing better than Paul George, so give me more money than him. That's the argument that they can use. And this is the problem when we give players like Paul George all of this money. This is the main problem, and this is something that should not happen. Players should not be making all of this money. They should not. But that is besides the point. I agree with the trade. I just don't agree with the reason for the trade. Now, what teams could actually fulfill this trade? That you guys might be asking. Well, one of the teams on the trade rumors was the Sacramento Kings, which I think is a terrible idea, and I don't think that the Kings are going to do this trade, because the problem with the Kings is their lack of defense and the three-point shooting. Now, Jimmy is a solid defender, but he's getting older now, so I don't think his defense is going to be as good as what it was. Not to mention, he is also a ball-dominant player who doesn't shoot as many threes as you would like, meaning that the Kings situation would not benefit with Jimmy Butler in the slightest. So I don't think the Kings are one of them, but a team that actually might be a good fit for him, to be honest, would be the Golden State Warriors. That would make the most sense. A 3-team trade between Golden State, the Raptors, and the Miami Heat, that would make the most sense. This is a trade proposal from The Athletic, saying that the Heat acquire Bruce Brown Jr. From the Raptors, Dennis Schroeder, Gary Payton, and Gary Payton II, 1 first-round pick and 1 second-round pick from the Warriors. The Raptors would acquire Andrew Wiggins and Gui Santos, and the Warriors would acquire Jimmy Butler. That would make the most sense. Excuse me. The Warriors, they've been struggling recently. They believed that their roster wasn't going to be able to maintain the amount of success that it has in the beginning of the season. I did not think that they were going to be any sort of contenders going into later this year, and I've been proven right once again. And this trade would make the most sense, giving Steph Curry someone else to legitimately play with and giving Jimmy a chance to win again. Another team that could end up working would be the Houston Rockets. They have the assets that could legitimately trade for Jimmy Butler. A 3-team trade between those two teams, as well as the Brooklyn Nets. The Heat would acquire Bojan Bogdanovic, DeAnthony Melton, Zaire Williams, first-round pick and a second-round pick from the Nets. They would get Jeff Green and a first-round pick and a second-round pick from the Houston Rockets. Houston would acquire Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson, along with Keon Johnson, and the Nets would acquire Jalen Green, Jock Landale, Jashawn Tate, and Aaron Holiday from the Houston Rockets. I don't think this would be an ideal trade for Brooklyn, but obviously it would be a much more ideal trade for those other two teams. I don't think that's going to happen just because I don't think the Nets are willing to do that and give up some of their draft capital, because they are going to try and commit to this rebuild. Now, one of the teams that I saw a possibility for, which would be a very big surprise, would be the Phoenix Suns. Trading away Bradley Beal, and then the Suns would acquire Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson from the Heat. That would be a surprising swing, which I don't think would... It would be pretty it would be interesting seeing Jimmy Butler and Kevin Durant along with Devin Booker. That would be a much better fit, in my opinion, than having Bradley Beal. But again, age is a number unless you're LeBron. And Bradley Beal for the Miami Heat, I don't know if that's also going... I don't really see that as a benefiting move. Remember, Bradley Beal, when he's on a mediocre team, isn't really able to do much aside from put up 60 points. Remember when he was on Washington and he didn't do anything for Washington aside from put up really good numbers? I mean, when John Wall was out and he was the only one there, and when Russell Westbrook was on the team, they did not make the playoffs until Russell Westbrook got on the team. So, not a very ideal move for the Heat in that situation, but again, they'd probably have to deal with Jimmy Butler being a diva. And also, before I end off the segment, he ended up getting suspended from the Miami Heat and is most likely not going to play for like the next 10 games. Now, another potential landing spot before I end off the segment is the Memphis Grizzlies. That's another team that you should watch out for when looking at the a team that could acquire Jimmy Butler. But that's all that I have in this fourth segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into that's all I have for the third segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the fourth segment where I talk about the NFL wildcard matchups and my predictions for each of the teams that are going to play in the wild card as well as the results. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I believe it started to snow. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about the NFL wildcard matchups because they have already been decided. And I'm just going to give off some of my predictions for these matchups and these games and exactly, what's going to happen. So the first wildcard matchup that we have got is going to happen on Saturday, January 11th. And I dropped my phone. That's always nice. I am rusty today. This is awful. But on January 11th, the Chargers are going to match up against the Houston Texans. And despite the fact that the Chargers have a better record than the Texans are going to be the team that ends up hosting this wild card matchup. I'm picking the Chargers in this one. I have much more faith in Justin Herbert in this season than I do with CJ Stroud in this season. Herbert has by far the better numbers than CJ Stroud. He has more passing yards, he has more passing touchdowns, and fewer interceptions than CJ Stroud. And quite recently, CJ Stroud has been in a very bad sophomore slump. He's had some very embarrassing losses. A loss against the Ravens where he only put up 2 points. In fact, he didn't even put up those 2 points. His defense did. A loss to the Kansas City Chiefs where he only ended up scoring 19 points and threw 2 interceptions in this game. And another embarrassing loss to the Tennessee Titans in this year, where he threw he actually got outplayed a little bit by Will Levis, which is something that I never thought I would say. He threw 2 interceptions in that game as well. An embarrassing loss to the Detroit Lions, where Jared Goff turned into Jared Goof and threw 5 interceptions in that one game, and the Texans still ended up blowing the game in the end of the day. An embarrassing loss to the New York Jets, where they only put up 13 points, and he only accumulated 191 passing yards, which is not ideal. Another embarrassing loss to the Packers, and also a stinker performance against the Minnesota Vikings, where he only put up 7 points. So he's had some really embarrassing, really inexcusable losses in this season, and I don't really think that they're going to be able to go up against the Chargers in this one. And not to mention, they're also going to have to fight a lot of injuries and players being injured on this team. Now, while they do have the home field advantage, I don't think that's going to really matter all that much for the Chargers in this game. The Chargers, their losses in this season, I mean, the Cardinals when they were really good, the Chiefs and the Steelers. The Steelers when they were really good. The Ravens, the Chiefs again, the Buccaneers, and those were all of the losses that the Chargers have had in this season. And regardless, I think this team is built a little bit better, and they aren't going to hinder as much from the injuries as the Texans are. So those are my thoughts. I think the Chargers are going to easily win in this one. I don't really think there's going to be any upsets in this first round matchup. Aside from one team, and I'll get to that in a minute. But next wildcard matchup is the Ravens. They're going to go up against the Steelers. This is a divisional rematch, a division rivalry, I guess you could say. And I don't think the Steelers stand a chance. Like, I'm just going to put it that way. Lamar Jackson, he is the MVP of the league. There is absolutely no way that the Steelers are going to be able to beat the Ravens in the postseason. However, I will say Lamar Jackson and his biggest bugaboo and the biggest stain on his reputation as a good quarterback is in the postseason. He's been unable to get it done for several years. However, I think if there was going to be any year where he does get it done, this will be the year. I genuinely think that the Ravens, they have one of the best chances of making the Super Bowl and being able to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. I genuinely think it could happen. And for the Steelers, they do this every year. It's no surprise for the Steelers that they're actually in the playoffs, and it's no surprise that they're most likely not going to get farther than the first round. No surprises there whatsoever. So, not really much that needs to be said about this, aside from this is we expect this to happen. We expect all of this to happen. Now, the next game on this series is of wildcard games is the Broncos going up against the Bills. Now, if there was any game that I would have picked to upset, it would be this one. I think if there was any team right now that could beat the overdogs or the hot dogs, I guess you would call them, would be the Broncos beating the Bills. Simply put, Josh Allen puts up stinker performances in the most important moments in the playoffs. This is another stain on his career. Now, while for the most part, he plays good in the playoffs. He has good playoff games, unlike Lamar Jackson, where Lamar Jackson has only a couple of good playoff games. Josh Allen has a lot of them. However, he also puts up stinkers. And he's also put up several stinkers in this season. In fact, one of the worst performances that he's ever had was against the Houston Texans, where he only recorded 9 completed passes and 131 yards, which is disgusting. It was absolutely terrible, that kind of performance. And not to mention, he also ended up losing to the Ravens, who, in case you guys forgot, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, they were fighting for the MVP conversation right there. But again, he's had several games where he just puts up blah numbers, I guess you could say. There's really no other way around it other than calling it blah performances, because it's he'll lay an egg in random games, and in games where you don't really expect him to lay an egg. And I remember against the Bengals, he had home field advantage and was looking like he was going to end up playing the Chiefs in the postseason, but he ended up losing, and Stephon Diggs was very, very mad that they ended up losing in that game. But yeah, if there was any team that I could see if there was any game that I could see an upset happening, it would be in this one. Bo Nix is surprisingly an incredible quarterback. Surprisingly, in his first year as a player. Now, I want to let it be known that Bo Nix, while Josh Allen did not play in the last game, Bo Nix has more touchdowns than Josh Allen, and he also has more passing yards than Josh Allen. I'm just pointing that out there. I understand that Josh Allen did not play in the final week, but I'm just pointing that out there. Now, the next game, Packers against the Eagles. Now, if Jordan Love wasn't injured going into this game, I would have actually picked the Packers to upset the Eagles, and they would have been my team that I would have thought would be most likely to cause an upset. But because Jordan Love is most likely going to be out for this season, for the postseason, I don't think the Eagles are going to lose. I don't think the Eagles are going to lose. They're a well-oiled machine. They have Saquon Barkley, and I believe that Jalen Hurts is going to be back and ready for the postseason. So, not really much that needs to be said. Also, to add more insult to injury, they ended up beating the Packers in the regular season, the first game of the regular season. They just completely outplayed them. Despite Jalen Hurts being a turnover machine in that game, they were still able to win. Jalen Hurts has completely cut the turnovers from what he was in the beginning of the season. And Saquon is just Saquon. So I really don't think that there's any way that the Eagles end up blowing this game. Unless it was like last year where they just collapse at the end of the season. But they have not collapsed yet. So I don't really see the Packers losing this game. I don't see the Packers winning this game, especially with their lack of Christian Watson and their lack at quarterback. I don't see that happening. If it does happen, though, I am going to laugh so hard, and I am going to make fun of all of my friends who are Philly fans. I'm going to be like, what happened? That is going to be the most hilarious thing, if that does happen. Next, the Commanders, they're going to go up against the Bucks in this game. Now, while the Bucks are technically a higher seed than the Commanders, I don't really think you would call the Commanders beating them an upset because the Commanders have a much better record than Tampa Bay. And for some reason, Tampa Bay is like they're the favorites when looking at the spread. For some reason, I personally think that Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, they're going to end up beating the Bucks, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us think that as well. Now, that's not to say that this game isn't going to be competitive. In fact, I think of all of the games that I've mentioned, this is going to be the most competitive game in the entirety of the wild card. The Bucks, they have a competent team with Baker Mayfield and a great wide receiver in Mike Evans, and Jaden Daniels we all know about Jaden Daniels, and we all know about the receiving core in Washington as well, just with how amazing Jaden Daniels has been making these guys, and they're talented in their own right, but still, this is probably going to be the most competitive game in the wild card. But I'm picking Washington. And then finally, the Vikings going up against the Rams. As we remember, the Vikings, they had to play against the Lions in the final game of the season, and in their final game of the season, they ended up losing, which made them the first 14-win team that has to play an away game in the wild card round. The first time in the history of the NFL that's ever happened. And I still have the Vikings winning, honestly. Now, there's also a lot of talk on whether or not the Rams actually have a solid chance now that the Rams are healthy and ready for the postseason. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Vikings are going to rebound from their last loss to the Lions, and I just don't see them losing. I really don't. Despite the fact that they do have Sam Darnold as their quarterback, I think that their offensive weapons, they're going to be a little bit too much for the Rams to handle, and I think that despite the fact that the Rams are going to be healthy going into this, I don't think it would matter for the Vikings. Granted, would not be surprised if the Vikings end up losing this game, but I don't see that happening. But because the Vikings a lot of people thought that the Giants were going to lose to the Vikings in that one time, and that didn't happen, despite the fact that the Vikings were heavy favorites. And the Giants, they had Daniel Jones at quarterback. If you're able to beat a team with Daniel Jones at quarterback, you can do anything. But that's all that I really have to say in this fourth segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the fifth segment, where we go to the NBA once again, and we look at the power rankings that were just released an hour ago. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, we are going to be looking at the NBA power rankings that were released 30 minutes ago, I should say, to about an hour ago. And hold on just 1 second. Let me just go ahead and pull up this list, and let me pull up the schedule a couple weeks ago. And there we go. You guys should... Okay. So you guys don't see it on the screen. That's nice. All right. Let me just... There we go. Now you guys see it on the screen. All right. So first team is, of course, the Oklahoma City Thunder. They recently beat the Boston Celtics yesterday. They won 105-92. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander dropped 33 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks, a chase down block on Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum put up another mediocre performance, 26 points, 7 for 17. And he did record 10 rebounds, but again, for his standards, in my opinion, they were rather mediocre. I'm more looking at the field goal percentage being mediocre more so than the actual stats, right? A majority of his points were accumulated at the free throw line, and you remove those free throw points, he would have had only 16. Jaylen Brown ended up recording 21 points, another mediocre performance. Derek White played pretty less than mediocre in that game as well. 11 points, 4 for 13. And, I mean, this was really all OKC. Now, the fact that they do not have Chet Holmgren, and they're still winning these games, is nothing short of impressive. And, I mean, they deserve to be ranked higher than the Cavs, in my opinion. And they have a winning streak of 15 games. They're tying the Cavs' 15-0 start for the longest streak in the league in the last 2 seasons. And Cleveland, they're also a competent team, 31-4. They've just been on fire, both of these teams. I wouldn't be surprised if the Celtics are back up above the Knicks, which makes zero sense in my opinion. I mean, personally, I wouldn't do this. The Knicks, they did have an embarrassing loss to the Chicago Bulls, which is probably the biggest reason as to why they're moving down. And Karl-Anthony Towns, he dropped 44 points in that game with 16 rebounds and was probably the biggest reason why the game was so close, because towards the end of the game, it was looking like a little bit of a blowout. Karl-Anthony Towns did all that he could to put his team into a position to try and win this game, but it was all for naught, as I hope he's fine, because I do remember he left the game with an injury, so I really hope he's okay. But, you know, I could see why the rankings they had to change like that. Now, Houston being at number 5 as opposed to being at number 7 is a change that I welcome. I do not mind this change in the slightest. The Houston Rockets, they ended up beating the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, it should be noted that the Lakers, they were 4th in the Western Conference when this happened. And guess what? They still have to go through the Nuggets in the first round. If the playoffs were to end today, if the playoffs were to end when the Lakers were 4th, actually no, if the playoffs were to still end today, they would still have to go through the Denver Nuggets in order to make it past the first round, which is unbelievable. It's unbelievable, but I digress. Houston, they are the second-ranked team in the entirety of the Western Conference, which is the most difficult conference to play in, and I welcome this. I welcome them being ranked at number 5. I do agree with them being higher ranked than the Memphis Grizzlies, even though I have no problem with Memphis being ranked over them, because Memphis is just as competent of a team as the Houston Rockets are. Excuse me. Now, the Denver Nuggets, they move up a little bit because they ended up beating Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs, and I know it sounds a little bit overrated but the big reason why they ended up moving up was because Victor dropped 20 and 23, and the Nuggets were still able to win because of Jokic's 46, 10, and 9. Literally, without Jokic, this team would be in the dirt, which is part of the reason why I don't think they deserve such high of a ranking, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. And the teams that are... Okay, the Clippers being at number 8... I would much rather have them at number 8 than the Bucks, which are probably ranked at 9th. Ooh, even better. The Mavericks, they are at number 9, which makes total sense. Now, I think you need to flip-flop the Dallas Mavericks and the Clippers, and maybe you're overrating the Denver Nuggets just a little bit too much. But the Lakers moving up, that's a really good thing. That's a good thing. I like that. I like them being at 10 as opposed to being at 15, which was incredibly underrated. Minnesota moving down, they deserve to move down. They don't even deserve to be in top 12, in my opinion. Pacers moving up a little bit, I think a little bit preemptive, but again, they did beat the Phoenix Suns, which was a team that used to be in the top 10, but, you know, they have regressed a little bit. The Orlando Magic, they moved down from 10 to 13, which I completely understand. We just need to wait for Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero to come back, and then they're going to be unstoppable. Miami Heat, ranked at number 14, also makes sense. San Antonio Spurs being at 15, again, that makes sense. The Bucks being at 16. Finally, this is where they belong, around bottom 15, bottom 16, and maybe even lower than that. This is good. This is what should have happened. I am so, finally, because this Bucks team is not as good as what you might think they are. They are not a good team. They have Giannis, and that's it. They're not a good team. So far in the month of January, they lost to Brooklyn, and they lost to the Portland Trailblazers. Terrible stuff right there. That is terrible ball. But... next team, Warriors being at 17. They deserve to be at 17. They're not going to get any better unless they trade. The Atlanta Hawks being at number 18 makes a little bit of sense. Again, another mid-tier team. They're weird because they beat the Celtics twice and they lose to the Pistons. They're weird. They're a weird team. I believe they also have some loss. I think they also have a loss to Washington in this year. Again, a very weird team. Sacramento moving up makes zero sense whatsoever. They deserve to be at 23. They don't deserve to be at number 19. Philly moving down makes total sense. They do not deserve to be anything higher than 20. Detroit moving up makes a little bit of sense. Chicago moving down does not make sense, seeing as how they beat the Knicks. Suns moving down, I don't know about that. I'm pretty sure that's going to change given the rest of the year. Brooklyn staying at 24, and these teams are all going to stay in the same spots as I expect. The Washington moving down, that makes total sense. Bottom teams, Charlotte should move to 29, and Washington should move to 30. That's really my only hiccup. But let me know in the comments what you guys think of this list. Again, not really surprised with a lot of these outcomes. I actually welcome a lot of these differences. The only thing that I really do not welcome all that much is the Denver Nuggets being ranked so high. I don't think Denver would be nothing without Nikola, And that should be something that these power rankings should take into account. I understand that the Denver Nuggets, they are in the playoff, right? They are in the playoffs if the season were to end today. But still, I think that's a little bit too much. I think that's a little bit too high of a ranking. But again, let me know in the comments what you guys think of that. And that's it for the show. That is all that I have on this 5th segment. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, we'd love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, something you're dying to share. We're all ears. And if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you could send in your comments and or donations that way. If Super Chat's not your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. That's all that I have for today on this segment. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit.